You gotta have house music all night long with Manchester Made Me Funky.
Hi, my name's David Dunne and Manchester made me funky. So house music's been a part of my life since the 80s and it's meant an awful lot to me, not just as a DJ but as a punter, as a clubber, because that's how I started, you know, getting into house music, going to clubs. I actually heard it first, don't tell anyone, in Liverpool at a club called The State, because I was there for university, but then I came home in '86 and it had kicked off at the Hacienda. So it's been a release to me. It's been a source of happiness, joy. I've met people through house music. As a DJ, you know, I've travelled the world, played at some amazing places through house music. So it's been a really important part of my life for getting on for, you know, well over 30 years now. And if I was to sum up the kind of stuff I play, I guess because I was a child in the 60s, so I'm older than most of the other people on the bill, I grew up with a sister who played Motown and Stax all the time at home, which was dance music, and it was vocal dance music. So that's always taken me towards the more vocal sound. So I do love a good vocal house tune, and that's the kind of stuff I play. And because I came up through Motown as a kid and then started buying disco, I've always been drawn to kind of the disco influenced house music. So somewhere in there really, but I do love a good thumper as well. My first radio job was at Piccadilly Radio, which became Key 103. And that was incredible for me because when I was a kid, when I was about 12, Piccadilly Radio started, and it's really hard to explain to somebody who wasn't around then what a big deal it was to have a local radio station, because apart from BBC Radio Manchester, there wasn't one. And you had this amazing sounding station talking about places where you lived, with people who had voices like you, with all kinds of music on it. And I was that radio spot at age 12, hiding under the bedclothes with my headphones in to listen to James Stanage on Piccadilly late at night and that kind of stuff. And that's where I got my first radio job in '87. So to walk through the reception on that first day that I'd been to as a kid to get car stickers was amazing for me. And I went in there and had a few jobs in there. I used to work on clubs and concerts. Then I started becoming a specialist producer. I produced Frank Sidebottom, the jazz programme, the classical programme, and they let me on air. And I was a massive fan of Stu Allen, who was there at the time, who only used to play an hour of house. This is '87, '88, and he had an hour of soul, hour of hip hop, an hour of house. And I was going to the Hacienda by this time and said to the boss, look, we need a show playing that kind of music. And Stu at that point didn't want to do a fully house show, and he very kindly said to the boss, why don't you let Dave do it? And the boss went, all right. So the isometric dance class, it was called, it was Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock. They used to let me loose. And I was basically playing everything that was going to be played in the Hacienda that coming weekend, because I'd go to Eastern Bloc Records and get the early deliveries, stick it on the show, and then you'd be hearing it in the next 3 or 4 nights at the Hacienda. So that was my first ever radio job. And then, you know, went on to work on Kiss when that started, which eventually became Galaxy. And then I've done things like Ministry of Sound Radio, Jazz FM, Smooth FM, all kinds of stuff. So that's also been a big part of my life since '86, '87 really. It's still there now, doing the Triple D radio show.
Incredible history.
It's been a long old haul, and there's been some ups and downs, but the problem, as anybody who works in radio will tell you, the problem is when radio gets a hold of you, if it gets a hold of you, it's really hard to let it go. Really hard to let it go. You either take to it or you don't, and if you take to it, you've had it. And it's kind of like that cat that you have that you really, really love. You love your cat. The cat will love you sometimes, other times it just does its own thing. And when you get stuck in radio, you are stuck. It's really hard to let it go. I think at the moment, for me, if I'm listening to radio in Manchester, you know, I'm listening to either online stuff like The Buzz, I'm listening to BBC Radio Manchester for speech stuff. But if we're looking at something that did something like Kiss, the nearest to it is actually Gadio. And you know, I've often said, and my show's on Gadio, so full disclosure, they're one of the first people to take the Triple D show. they're probably playing most of what we would play if Kiss was still going, because they're very dance focused. Now dance music's become pop, but people have forgotten that when Kiss was going 94 to 97, dance music was also pop. Ultra Flavour was a top 10 record, for instance. You know, people forget that all that kind of stuff were hits as well. So I would love to hear something like Kiss now, doing what Kiss did, being really local presenters, all kinds of specialist music with local people on air. You know, that's what it's missing, and it'd be great to hear it. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to be part of it. Well, let's get credit where credit's due. Hed Kennedy was started by Mark Doyle, and Mark Doyle, you know, forged that brand at a time, you know, 1999, when trance was king. And this is the other thing people forget. When Hed Kennedy came out, that kind of vocal house music, disco influenced music, soulful music was not in fashion. Trance was everywhere, you know, Out the Blue, System F, that kind of stuff, Paul van Dyk. So straight away when it came out, it was its own little niche. And what happened was it grew quite organically over 2 or 3 years from 1999 onwards, with no advertising, no spend on marketing. Word of mouth. People started buying the compilations. I joined them in 2003 to produce the radio show. I was living in London, and they just needed a producer because the show did sound a bit rough, and it was on Galaxy and it was on Jazz FM, and they asked me to go and produce it. So that's how I started. And I was doing my own DJ thing, but their gigs were getting more and more sort of high profile, and they were growing. And about a year in, they asked me to try out and do a gig for them. And the first gig I ever did for them was a shopping centre in West Bromwich in a Cecil G. And I found out afterwards it was a bit of a test to see if I actually A, go and do it, and B, could do it in a clothes shop. And this, you know, luckily we got away with it. And then, yeah, I started DJing for them. And then when Mark left in 2006 to go and start Fierce Angel, because I'd been on Galaxy, I guess, in the past, and I did radio, they asked me to take over the presenting of it. So yeah, then I did that for another 4 years, and it was the biggest Saturday night radio show on all radio in the UK. That's like Radio 1, you name it, it beat a lot of them. Not down to me, down to that brand, because it was Hed Kennedy, that was what counted. It's a tough one really, because I think I can tell you a label that I think really changed it, and that was AM PM, which then became Defected, and Sulfuric. Those two labels, but you know, you have to remember AM PM, early mid-90s, Defected, the end of the 90s, you know, that came in then, and then Sulfuric, and they licensed quite a bit of Sulfuric stuff that Brian Tappert started. That was when you kind of heard really good production, really soulful, funky vocal house music that was well made as well. It wasn't, you know, a dodgy bootleg, much as though I love a dodgy bootleg. It wasn't a dodgy bootleg. It was well produced, had that American feel that harked back to the stuff from the mid-90s. And I think that's what started that pushback. And there were other labels like, you know, Naked Music as well for the more underground thing. But for me, that sort of, I would say 2001, 2002, Defected Sulfuric sound, that's when I was like, oh, you know what, this has got some legs now. I can feel it coming back, feel that euphoric vocal house thing coming back, which had kind of vanished really. When trance took over, that kind of soulful, deep vocal stuff just went right out of fashion. People were still playing it, but it wasn't huge. I suppose the big overground hit, the big one that made it, was Lola's Theme. You know, Shapeshift, when that hit, that was a massive moment, you know, #1 record, absolutely what we would define as funky vocal house, high quality production, great hook, and that for me, that's like a really significant record, I think, in a lot of different ways. Well, I'd have to go back, because I'm old, I'd have to go back further maybe than some people. So Black Box Everybody Everybody is one of my all-time favourite vocal house records, and that's a 90s one. And there's a La Freak mix of it, which is the best one going, I think. So that one has always been one of my favourites. The Sanchez mix of Love Tribe, Stand Up, for me, like it definitely top 5. Although not quite as funky, but around that same time, Alcatraz, Give Me Love, which I just think, you know, kills every time, wherever you play it. The Full Intention mix of Duke, So In Love With You. I really, you know, would play that. Most sets I used to do at Venus, I would always try and squeeze that one in. On a more recent one, Lovebirds Want You In My Soul, I think is just a beautiful piece of vocal house music. And I'm just trying to think of something else. If we're going really recent, the stuff I've loved in the last year that kind of relates to that is anything on that Horse Meat Disco album, Love and Dancing. I just think it's a great album in its own right. It's got everything about it that we loved from, say, 10, 13 years ago. You know, loads of the stuff on there could have come out in the heydays of the clubs that we're talking about. So they're kind of, but to be honest, every day is something different. The only thing I can ever tell you is what my all-time favourite house music is, house song is, which has never changed, which is Little Louie's French Kiss. And that for me is the perfect house record, because it just goes and builds. It's like a shark. I love that song so much, and that's my all-time favourite. The others kind of float around, if I'm honest. You've got to divide the technology we use to play music from the technology used to find music. They're two separate things, because technology has always driven the art, if you want to call it an art or a skill, of DJing. When I started at school discos in 1979, there were no vari-speed decks. There were just two record decks that were both at the same speed, played 33 or 45. That was it. So beat mixing from most DJs at that point, you know, we are going back a while, was in the UK at least, was not something that people knew about very much. You know, Greg Wilson famously was one of the first people to ever do it on TV to demonstrate what it was in the 80s. Then, you know, Technics come in, so then you get to grips with Technics in the 80s. And then, you know, you go forward, you make another jump, then CDJs come in. Now, I can remember when CDJs coming in, people going, that's rubbish, that's just cheap, it's rubbish. Get back to vinyl. And then CDJs became accepted, putting CDs in. You know, so we were still using physical materials to play music off, whether it was a piece of plastic that big on a CD player or that big on vinyl. You know, and the decks vanished from clubs, in most clubs, unless it was a hip hop or, you know, a hip hop club, or it was someone that was having turntablists in. Record decks vanished. They were what people put the CD wallets on. They weren't maintained. They were just there for 99% of DJs, and people accepted that. And then, you know, laptops came in, and then, you know, you had DJs saying, laptops, rubbish, not as good as CDJs, that's proper DJing. Now, I'm a laptop and controller DJ, and I do that for a few reasons. One, record boxes herniated a disc in my back through hauling two of them around the world. Two, I can take out 3, 4, 5,000 tunes and have anything that I can find in 5 seconds by just searching for it. And with my kit, no matter what club I go into, I need 2 channels, one channel, 2 phonos or 2 XLRs. I can plug in, doesn't matter what state the kit's in. So for me, it's simplicity, because all that counts to the punter is what's coming out of the speakers. The internet is a different matter. How we find music is different, and you're quite right in as much as we used to go, Saturdays was record shopping day for every DJ that I ever knew. You'd go to your favourite record shops. There was a social aspect to it, because you'd meet, you know, your fellow DJs, you'd know the people behind the counter. You know, if you went to certain shops regularly, you might get a brew, depending on, you know, how much they like you. But there was all that to it, and there was only ever a finite amount of those records in that shop. So if you went into that shop and there was only 5 copies, you knew only 5 of you would have it in that city or town. That's gone. The internet's changed that. You can find anything you want instantly. That's changed what DJs do, you know, when it comes out of the speakers. And I don't think we should ever get the technology and the music delivery and the music finding, if you want, mixed up. What DJs use to play doesn't matter. And I've had countless social media arguments with this, because if, you know, there's no difference. Technology's always driven what DJs do, because you use tech. The ability to find the things that maybe make you stand out, that's different now. And you've really got to do a lot of searching to find something that's maybe different from other people. But it still comes down to the skill of the DJ. You could put 2 DJs in a club with the same 10 tunes, ask them to play a set out of it, and it'd be completely different, because it's how the DJ puts it together and what they do with it. So, you know, it has definitely changed. Do I miss the record shopping days? Yeah, I'm an old 50-odd-year-old man. I'm off to Piccadilly Records after this, just to go and have a wander through and have a look through, and I'll go to Vinyl Exchange because I like it. It's fun. Do I play vinyl out? No, and I have no desire to. I have no problem with that at all. I mean, again, you know, house music and dance music in general goes through cycles, so everything's got a cycle. You know, Motown, that kind of driven, quite upbeat driven R&B, old-fashioned R&B soul in the 60s turns into disco, huge. Disco dies down, hip-hop's there, electro's there, house music comes out. You know, house music originally really raw, made with really basic drum machines and studio kit, because a lot of the people who were making it couldn't afford much studio time. You go and listen to a Dunne, you go and listen to acid tracks, all that stuff. It's really simple how it was put together, and it developed as it went on. And then the styles of house music changed, you know, Italian piano house, huge, you know. Then things got a little bit tougher. You went into progressive house in the early 90s. Then that got a bit dull for some people, so vocal house came out. So it changes, trance after that, it changes all the time. We've had a massive thing the last 5 years in disco, which for me, as a dyed-in-the-wool disco fan, terrific. But even I'm getting bored of straight up, here's a disco tune with chopped up drums under it, that's all we've done. So I think that's changing for sure. I think that is going to become a bit less popular and people are going to dig a little deeper. But I would say from the stuff I've been sent even in the last year of lockdown for the radio show, some really, really strong house music, like what I would call proper high quality stuff, vocal and non-vocal, really well produced, really well put together, really exciting music. So I think, you know, we'll come out of that disco thing and it'll be slightly tougher, slightly deeper, maybe still a bit vocally here and there, but I think that's probably where that kind of stuff is going next. But as we know, you can never predict it in house music. You never know really what's going to catch on and what won't. It usually comes from a really good idea. It's just something as basic as that whoever's producing that tune has an idea that they know will translate into a house tune. And then it's all about the skill and interpretation of what that producer does with it. And again, you could put 2 producers in a studio and give them the same idea to work on, and it'd be completely different. That's why we have remixes. You give a tune to 3 different remixes, it comes back sounding really different. Me and Andy Daniels have just done a remix of a tune called Echo Drop by Tycho, big 90s kind of techie house tune. There's a bunch of remixes on it, every single one is different. So it really starts with the individual producer's idea, and then, you know, skills help, budget help, kit helps, but it's really about what that person does with that idea and what they want it to do on a dance floor to the clubbers. That's where it comes from. I think that they'll find everything that they used to find at the clubs they used to love, the Venuses, the Too Riskies, the Yesterdays, all those kind of places, you know, the places in Ashton, the places where we went to locally, not everybody came into town. They'll find that music, but I think the atmosphere will be like times 100. In the Head Candy days, for instance, you know, El Divino, nearly 2,000 people, one of the biggest venues we used to do. You know, we did a season on the Space Terrace, 3,000 people in that club. And from my experience of doing bigger events with that music, it works. It really does work, because there's this, you know, this collective happiness with that kind of music. The kind of music we're talking about for this event is not chin stroking, head nodding stuff. It's big vocal house anthems. Put 4,000 or 5,000 people in a room listening to that who've not been able to go and hear that for ages. It's going to go off. And I'm not saying that because I'm going to play that. It is going to go off. I know it is. Booth Rider was a one-off in every way, as a human being as well. I used to go to a club called Pips in Manchester. So Pips was like late 70s, early 80s, and it was the first club in Manchester to play electronic music, I would say. So, you know, all the kind of stuff like Bowie, Japan, you know, early Depeche Mode, Human League, that kind of stuff. It was where you went if you didn't want to go to the Sharon and Tracy clubs. You know, it was like the Hacienda 10 years earlier with that kind of music that fitted it. And I only learned years later that Dave Booth was one of the residents there. So I'd actually danced to Dave Booth when I was 19 and never knew it. I never knew who he was. Then we sort of go forward later, and we heard, you know, there was this guy who was playing at Manchester Poly on Saturday nights in kind of the Manchester era. And I went to hear him play. I didn't actually get to meet him until the Kiss days. And by this point, he was doing Paradise Factory with Huey, his DJ partner. He was doing Garlands. And that's when I kind of got to meet him. And that's when I really found out what a one-off he was, because he was a really unusual person. He was really, you know, as a human being, he was quite unusual. He was the only DJ I ever met who still practiced every single day, like every day. Right up until the end, he'd be on his decks every single day. He was completely obsessive about music, not just house music. He like knew his stuff about Northern Soul, about garage rock, you name it, Booth Rider knew about it, and it was what he lived for. He could take it really seriously, sometimes, you know, way over the top. I did a Paradise Factory reunion, and we were doing the afters at Manto, and I was going to go on first, and he was coming over and he said, Dave, there's a few tunes that I want to play, so can I send you a list of a few things to avoid? I'm like, Dave, not a problem. Manto was your gaff. I'll do whatever. The list was 120 records. Like anything I could have possibly played in those 2 hours was on that list, because, you know, we had to play Paradise Factory stuff, but it was Booth Rider. It didn't matter. Yeah, I have a lot of memories of Dave, but my favourite memory of him is, for anybody who went to the Breakfast Club on early Sunday morning at Manto, he used to be, this was when the decks were in the corner as you went in, so you went through the doors and they were on your left, and Booth Rider would be there, and I'd go in and he'd inevitably playing some incredible record, because he played things other people didn't play, and he'd be there and he'd just go. He also, by the way, when he was playing vinyl, had his own shorthand. So if you ever looked at his record labels, they had these little squiggles on them. And I remember asking him one time, going, Dave, what's that about? Is it shorthand? He went, oh no, it's my code. Going, what's your code? And he's like, well, I like to know I've got 3 ways of getting in and out of every record. So I've got marks which tell me where I can get in and where I can get out, and whether it's just drums or bass line, so that whatever record I pull out, I know what I'm going to do. He owned 25,000 records. He probably went through most of them doing that. That's what you need to know about Booth Rider. And he was really kind. The other thing I would say, he was really kind. He was so nice to me and so welcoming when he didn't have to be. Yeah, you know, he's missed, not just as a DJ, he's a human being, because he was a one-off. I do think it's harder now, because the one thing about the technology, the change of technology, is that you don't have to spend 4 years practicing in your bedroom to master a pair of Technics. You know, CDJs you could get the hang of fairly quickly. Technics were buggers to learn. And in the course of learning how to use them, you'd be learning other things about DJing before you ever went out to play. Obviously now you can kind of plug and play, really. If you want to use the sync button on the CDJs, you can do. There's a lot of DJs out there, and I think probably one of the ground rules is still really what it's ever been, which is find out what it is you want to play. And it might be one genre, or it might be a number of genres, but find out what it is you want to play that you love playing, and stick at that, because you're going to do better playing what you love than playing something just to get a gig that you don't really love. So I think, you know, if you are passionate about it and you know your stuff, that's what you should do. And I think you have to work it much harder now. So much of it seems to be about followers and likes, and actually, you know, that's a tiny part of it. We've always had to self-promote. DJs have always had to do that, and you've always had to go looking for gigs when you start off and play a few places that don't pay you, or don't want to pay you, or that the toilets are overflowing. But now you've really got to try and connect. And what I've found a lot of people have done in the last 2 or 3 years because of that is they've started their own little nights somewhere. I play for Box Music, which is at Stage and Radio, first Saturday of every month. It's a collective of people. Nobody's making any money out of that. But they're all going to throw a party and play the music that they love. And that's a good way of starting it. If you can't find somewhere to play, find a little venue, get a couple of mates involved, and just do it yourself, because you'll learn a lot about how dance music as a business, how promoting works by doing that. But I don't envy young DJs trying to get involved and cut through, because I think it's really hard now. First of all, any music is incredibly beneficial for your mental health, because any kind of positive, uplifting music will change your mood. That's one of the things that music does. It's really effective at it. If you go back, if you want a bit of a biology lesson, if you go back to the most primitive stuff that we have as human beings, the first instrument ever invented was a drum. It might not have looked like a drum then, it might have been a hollowed out log, but the first thing that any human being learned to play to create some kind of rhythm was some kind of drum. And once you invent the drum, people start to dance. If there's a beat, people will dance to it. Even, we're going back hundreds of thousands of years, primitive man, that's where it started. So genetically, human beings by now, we're programmed to respond to rhythm. When you dance, it releases endorphins in your body, because it's physical activity, you're feeling an emotion, and the pleasure chemicals get released in your body. They, and serotonin, reduce anxiety and stress. That's why dancing feels so good, because it's the chemicals going around your body that reduce your stress, reduce your anxiety, make you feel better. And house music is especially good at doing that, because it's built to dance to. There's that's its reason to exist. This is to dance to, and DJs are going to make it so you don't have any gaps in the record, the music, so you can dance for 3-4 hours if you can. So it is incredibly helpful for people's mental health, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to getting back on the dance floor to have that release, to relieve that stress and anxiety. And it's a communal thing. You're with other human beings, and again, human beings are wired to group together. It's how we survived when we lived on the side of mountains. The people that went off by themselves got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. The human beings that stuck together communally survived. So we're wired to do that. So on a really primitive inner brain level, that's what music and dancing can do for you, and house music delivers that super efficiently. So yeah, I think it's incredibly beneficial for people's mental health. There's so much focus put on the people who produce the music and play the music and put on the nights, but without the clubber, none of it matters, none of it exists. So the people who pay to go to nights, the people who pay to go out and dance together and buy drinks at the bar and get the taxis in, on an economic level they're huge, but that's what he's there for. It's all very nice us sort of sitting at home in our studios noodling around on technology, making tunes or doing radio shows or stuff like that, but without an audience, without the clubber, the music fan, the dancing fan, it's meaningless. And a lot of people have got it wrong over the years by forgetting that that's actually at the centre of what you do. DJs are in essence there to entertain. That doesn't mean we have to do handstands or do ridiculous stuff like that. Though some people do, and some people throw cakes. Who knew? But essentially, it's entertainment. So the clubber is absolutely at the core of that. That is why I have a personal thing about DJs saying, "Oh, I smashed it tonight." The DJ should never say that. That's the clubber who should say that. You smashed it tonight. DJs, nah, don't do it. It's wank. Do it at your own pace. you know, so, you know, if you're a bit anxious about getting back out there, take it easy, do it slowly, try some of the seated events, you know, that are happening over this summer, for instance. And then when you feel able to go to a club, go. Don't ask for guest list, pay for tickets. There's thousands of people who haven't earned any money for over a year, and I know that's not just in dance music. You know, there's a lot of people, bar staff, glass collectors, door teams, people like that, who need people to come back to clubs again to get them going, to earn a living as well. And you know, go to as many things as you can to get it back on its feet and going again, and you know, enjoy yourself. We've been shut in for a long time. Don't be stood by the edge of the dance floor for 2 hours. Get involved. Hi, this is David Dunne, and Manchester made me funky. Going out to dance in Manchester isn't something that started in the noughties, 90s, 80s, or even 70s or 60s. You know, it started with the dance halls. So my mum was a nurse in the 50s before I was born, and she used to go out to all-nighters, 4 a.m. ballroom dancing nights at the Ritz in the city centre, and then drag herself back to the nursing home, and you know, she'd go and do a shift. So going out and dancing in Manchester in particular has been something that's been around for, you know, you're looking at 70 years now. And you go into the 60s when you had the Twisted Wheel that my sister used to go to, the classic, you know, Northern Soul Club in the city centre of Manchester, places like the Reno, you know, clubs like that. It's been part of the fabric of Manchester for a very, very long time, and it was traditionally something you could do if you didn't have a lot of money, you know, because you didn't need a lot of money to go to the Twisted Wheel or the Ritz before that, or you know, some of the clubs in the 70s, you know, that you go into Pips, you know, Pips was a couple of quid in, the Hacienda was cheap when it started. Clubbing was always something that working class people could go and do relatively cheaply and love doing, so it's been a massive part of the city for 70 years, and it is sad that, you know, there are now probably less clubs, nightclubs, than at any point, certainly in the last 20 or 30 years in Manchester, because the bar thing came along and people then got out of the habit of paying to go and listen to music to dance to, because they could go and do it in bars in the northern quarters. And you have something like the Warehouse Project, which is like a mini festival every weekend, which is an incredible thing to have in this city. And it does an awful lot for the reputation of Manchester, particularly in electronic music. But it's been part of the city's existence for, you know, 50, 60, 70 years. Mancs like to go out and dance together. It's what we've been doing for generations.
I mean, you've DJ'd all around the world, David. Do you think Manchester has got its own sound? Is there a Manchester sound? Are we different to other cities?
Right, you know, I'm a Salford lad originally, born and bred. I have played a lot of places. What I would say about Manchester, if you were coming to play and you'd never played here before, is if you get it right, the crowds will absolutely react. You know, it's not a too cool for school place. And that, you know, no matter what genre you're playing, if you come to Manchester and get it right as a DJ, then you will know about it. You will also know about it if you get it wrong. And you know, there's been tumbleweed on a few of my dance floors over the years. So the crowds are very, very reactive here. But I do think, if I'm honest, it's also true for places like Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow, anywhere really north of Birmingham. You will get very, very reactive crowds. It's not kind of a, you know, it's not a too cool for school sort of place. But you get it right in Manchester, you'll know about it. And most guest DJs I've spoke to at numerous clubs over the last 30 years, when they've come to Manchester and it's gone well, they've always wanted to come back. And that goes, you know, for like Carl Cox, some of the biggest names have always wanted to come back and play in Manchester. You know, the exception being Danny Rampling, who had a big hissy fit because somebody threw a bottle. What does he know?
You gotta have house music all night long with Manchester made me funky.